The greatest spiritual teachers promise you enlightenment will unite you with all beings. Yet every genuinely awakened individual I have observed walks utterly alone. This is not coincidence. This is not failure. This is the very nature of awakening itself. You see them in every age. The Buddha leaving his disciples, Christ in the wilderness for 40 days, the Upanishadic sages withdrawing to the forest. Those who claim to gather communities of the enlightened, who form spiritual societies and accumulate followers, reveal by these very actions that they have not awakened but merely substituted one form of delusion for another. Here is the paradox that will disturb you. The same recognition that reveals our fundamental unity with all beings simultaneously makes ordinary human association impossible. The moment you perceive that individual selves are temporary illusions projected by the principium individuationis, you can no longer pretend that gathering with other selves constitutes genuine connection. You are alone because there are no others. You are alone because you have seen that you and others are distinctions without ultimate reality. This knowledge isolates absolutely, yet it liberates completely. In the pages that follow, I shall reveal why this must be so, and why embracing this solitude is the only honest response to genuine spiritual insight. I have observed something curious in Frankfurt's coffee houses. Men and women pursue enlightenment with the same frantic energy they once applied to accumulating wealth. They collect spiritual experiences like merchants collect goods, speaking endlessly of their progress, their community of fellow seekers. This is the fatal error that ensures their continued suffering. They seek spiritual advancement as they sought worldly success, as a goal to achieve and display before others. The will merely changes its costume while continuing its relentless striving. What appears as spiritual seeking is often nothing more than ambition dressed in different garments. If you feel compelled to announce your realization to others, you remain identified with the phenomenal self that requires validation. True understanding eliminates the need for confirmation. When you genuinely grasp a truth, you do not run to the marketplace to proclaim it. Notice your own behavior. When you encounter spiritual insights, what is your first impulse? To share them? To find others who will confirm them? This impulse betrays continued identification with the separate self, the very illusion awakening supposedly dissolves. The test is simple. Spend one day speaking to no one about your spiritual understanding. Notice every impulse to share, explain, or seek validation. These impulses reveal what you still need from others. In the coffee houses, I observed two men claiming enlightenment. One gathered listeners, spoke of his transcendence, formed a circle of students. The other sat alone, directly addressed. The first was celebrated. The second was called eccentric. Yet only the second had genuinely seen through the veil of Maya. Genuine awakening produces specific characteristics that fraudulence cannot sustain. Watch for 5 minutes and fraudulence becomes apparent. The awakened individual does not announce his realization, does not gather disciples, does not require confirmation, does not join spiritual communities, does not compete for spiritual status. These absences reveal more than any presence could. Consider how someone responds to criticism. The unawakened defends himself vigorously. The partially awakened claims indifference while secretly wounded. The truly awakened neither defends nor claims indifference, for he recognizes that opinions pertain only to his phenomenal appearance. Notice the language people use. When someone speaks of we the awakened or our community, they presume the separate selves that genuine realization eliminates. Apply this test to yourself. Can you spend 1 week without mentioning your spiritual understanding? If not, examine what still requires external confirmation. A student once asked me, "When will I find others who truly understand?" I responded, "When you cease seeking them." For he had finally grasped that the very question presumes separate understanders, and the dissolution of that presupposition is itself the understanding he sought. Awakening does not lead to solitude. Awakening is solitude. The awakened individual walks alone, not because he has not found his people, but because he has recognized that his people and other people are distinctions without ultimate reality. When you truly grasp that individual persons are temporary manifestations of one underlying will, the possibility of ordinary human relationship dissolves. For who is there to relate to whom? The masses plea aloneness because it threatens the illusion of separate selfhood. Your response to solitude reveals whether you have penetrated this illusion or merely adopted new beliefs about it. Practice this. Sit in a public place. First, perceive the people around you as distinct individuals. Then shift your perception. See them as waves upon the same ocean, temporary formations of one underlying force. Notice how this changes your relationship to being among them yet apart from them. Once you grasp that the separate self is illusory, aloneness ceases to feel like loneliness. I once observed my poodle Atma chasing a scent along the riverbank, utterly absorbed, driven by forces she did not comprehend. The merchants passing by laughed at the dog's single-minded pursuit, yet I saw no difference between the poodle's blind striving and their own. When I speak of will, I do not mean your faculty for making decisions. I mean the blind, aimless, unconscious force underlying all existence, the thing in itself that all phenomena merely represent. The will has three characteristics. It is blind without intelligence or purpose. It is insatiable, no satisfaction ends its striving. It is universal, the same force operates in all beings. Consider carefully. Did you choose to want what you want? Or did wanting simply appear, demanding satisfaction regardless of reason? When you achieve a desire, does wanting cease, or does it merely shift to a new object? For 1 week, observe every desire that arises without immediately pursuing it. Notice the blind, mechanical quality. Desire appears without your choosing it, demands satisfaction without consulting your reason, and renews itself upon fulfillment. This observation begins the dissolution of the illusion that you are the author of your desires. You are not. You are their vehicle. Walking along the Rhine at sunset, I observed sunlight reflecting off the water's surface in thousands of separate points of brilliance. Each reflection appeared distinct, yet all were manifestations of the one sun. So too are individual consciousnesses. The principium individuationis, the principle of individuation, is the mechanism by which the one will appear as many separate beings. Space, time, and causality create the illusion of distinct persons from what is fundamentally one reality. You believe you are separate because your consciousness appears bounded by your body, your memories, your particular perspective. But these boundaries are phenomenal, not noumenal. What the Hindus call Maya, the veil of illusion, I describe philosophically as the principium individuationis. Both refer to the same truth. The one appears as many through forms that create phenomenal multiplicity from noumenal unity. Here is the paradox. Once you recognize that all suffering is the same, will suffering through different forms, genuine compassion becomes possible. But so does profound isolation. Practice this perceptual shift when interacting with others. First see them as separate beings with interests opposed to yours. Then see them as temporary formations of the same will that animates you. You are alone because there are no others, yet you cannot escape others because they are you. I observed a young couple at the theater, utterly absorbed in each other, convinced their love was unique and eternal. Yet I saw only the will employing its standard tactic, creating in each the delusion that the other holds the key to satisfaction. Romantic love appears as selfless devotion. In truth, it is the will to live in its most concentrated form, nature's mechanism for perpetuating existence by creating new suffering beings. The intensity of romantic love corresponds precisely to suitability for producing offspring though consciousness generates elaborate narratives about soulmates to obscure this mechanical function. Love always disappoints because it promises transcendence while delivering only temporary relief before the cycle renews. The beloved cannot provide cessation of wanting because both are manifestations of the same insatiable will. When experiencing romantic attraction, observe it as you would any manifestation of will. Notice when it arose, was it chosen? Notice what narrative consciousness generates to justify it. Notice how desire operates independently of the object's actual qualities. Once you recognize that romantic love is will's propagation mechanism, you cannot participate in it with naive intensity. This knowledge is painful but liberating. A merchant I knew pursued wealth for 20 years, believing it would bring contentment. Upon achieving it, he turned to reputation, then to love, then to spiritual attainment, each time believing this would finally satisfy. Only when all had been pursued and found wanting did he cease striving. Transformation follows a predictable progression through three essential disillusionments. First, disillusionment. You pursue goals believing achievement will bring lasting satisfaction. Instead, you discover that every satisfaction is temporary. Every achievement reveals another goal beyond it. Second disillusionment. Believing individual striving failed because you pursued alone. You turn to relationships, community, causes larger than yourself. You discover that others are equally driven by will, that their desires conflict with yours. Third disillusionment. Finally, you recognize that the self who seeks satisfaction is itself phenomenal rather than noumenal. Suffering ends not through finding what you seek, but through dissolution of the separate seeker. Each disillusionment is painful. The will generates new hopes even as old ones crumble. Most change objects of pursuit rather than questioning pursuit itself. Write three major pursuits from your life. For each, honestly assess. Did achievement bring lasting satisfaction or only temporary relief followed by renewed wanting? I once knew a man who renounced worldly ambition for spiritual seeking. He claimed to have transcended ego, yet spoke constantly of his renunciation, gathered admirers, distinguished himself as more advanced than ordinary seekers. He had merely replaced secular ambition with spiritual ambition. The will does not surrender easily. When confronted with recognition of its operation, it adopts new disguises. Let me reveal the 7 primary forms. First, spiritual ambition, pursuing enlightenment as achievement, collecting experiences like credentials. Second, holy community, seeking fellowship with the awakened. Third, teacher identity gathering students, establishing yourself as one who has attained. Fourth, practice as striving, believing enlightenment is something to earn through accumulated effort. Fifth, renunciation as status, taking pride in what you have renounced. Seventh, affecting indifference, performing nonchalance while secretly caring intensely. For 2 weeks, observe your spiritual life for these disguises. Each time you catch one, name it. This is the will, operating through spiritual ambition. This naming begins the dissolution of identification. Walking along the main river one autumn morning, I observed leaves falling from trees. Suddenly, the phenomenal distinction between falling leaf, flowing water, walking philosopher dissolved, all revealed as temporary formations of the one will. This perception lasted perhaps 30 seconds before ordinary consciousness returned. But those 30 seconds transformed everything that followed. Genuine awakening is not gradual accumulation, but sudden recognition. A moment when the veil of Maya parts and you perceive directly what you previously only comprehended intellectually. True seeing is not new information, but shift in perception itself. The world appears unchanged, yet utterly transformed. You perceive directly that boundaries between self and other are phenomenal rather than noumenal. Before seeing, you comprehend the principle philosophically, but remain identified with your phenomenal personality. After seeing, identification has loosened. The veil parts when readiness has been achieved through prior disillusionment and philosophical understanding. You cannot force this recognition. After true seeing, certain changes occur inevitably. Reduced identification with outcomes, decreased fear of death, spontaneous compassion, and inability to participate unconsciously in collective illusions. Daily spend 15 minutes contemplating unity. Observe some phenomenon and ask, what is the one reality appearing in this multiplicity? This prepares consciousness for genuine recognition. Each morning I take cold water washing, dress simply, eat the same breakfast. A visitor once remarked, Master Schopenhauer, for one so enlightened, your life seems remarkably ordinary. I responded, the difference is not that I take breakfast, but that I no longer believe the one who takes it is ultimately real. Awakening does not produce dramatic changes in behavior, but subtle shifts in relationship to behavior. The primary difference lies not in what one does, but in one's relationship to doing. The awakened individual eats, sleeps, works, walks, but does so without identification with the one who performs these actions. He experiences preferences, but recognizes them as the body's operations rather than his essential nature's requirements. Consider how someone responds when plans fail or comfort is disturbed. The unawakened protests and resists. The awakened notes the disruption without identifying with the body-mind's reaction. Notice when speaking. Do you feel agitation? If others misunderstand or reject your views, agitation reveals continued identification with the phenomenal self. For 1 week, practice this during daily activities. The body eats, awareness observes. The body walks, awareness observes. This reveals the natural separation between awareness and phenomena. 2 men claimed enlightenment in Frankfurt's philosophical circles. Observing both over years, I noticed the first responded defensively to criticism, sought disciples actively, maintained careful appearance of spiritual status. The second received criticism with genuine indifference, taught reluctantly when asked, lived simply without concern for others' assessment. Genuine awakening produces specific changes that cannot be faked. Let me provide 7 tests. Test 1. Deliver criticism. The genuinely awakened shows no defensiveness, no need to explain, no agitation whatsoever. Test 2. Offer praise. The awakened receives it without inflation, without pleasure that creates attachment. Test 3. Observe response to extended solitude. The awakened rests naturally in aloneness without restlessness. Test 4. Notice whether someone actively seeks students or responds only to genuine inquiry. Test 5. Observe behavior across time and circumstances. The awakened maintains equanimity through success and failure. Test 6. Notice relationship to spiritual status. The awakened never references their realization. Test 7. Assess what someone requires from others. The awakened requires nothing, no confirmation, no understanding, no agreement. Apply these tests to yourself through honest self-observation. This provides accurate assessment of current state versus claimed state. When I settled in Frankfurt in 1831, I established a routine I have maintained for decades. Rise at 7, cold washing, solitary breakfast, riding until noon, silent lunch at the Englischer Hof, 2-hour walk regardless of weather, evening reading or theater attended alone. This routine is not prison but fortress, protecting hard-won clarity from the world's incessant demands. Enlightened existence requires discipline, not the discipline of acquisition but of protection. The phenomenal mind, left undisciplined, drifts inevitably toward distraction and delusion, beginning each day with deliberate, mild discomfort, cold water, washing trains, non-identification with the body's preferences. The body prefers warm water. I provide cold. The body protests. I observe the protest without being the protest. Eating alone, I maintain awareness of eating's mechanical nature, the body's need, satisfaction's temporary nature, the inevitable return of hunger. Daily walking in all weather, I observe the city's inhabitants pursuing their endless strivings. This regular exposure prevents the opposite error of complete withdrawal. Evening aesthetic respite provides what aesthetic experience uniquely offers: temporary transcendence of will through contemplation of Platonic ideas. I receive no casual visitors, maintain no social obligations. This is not misanthropy, but protection. Each social interaction carries danger of reabsorption into collective perspectives. I observed the 1,848 democratic revolutions from my Frankfurt window. Idealists believed they could create better society through political reform. I saw only the will expressing itself through revolutionary fervor as it had through royalist stability, different forms, same substance. The awakened individual sees society as collective delusion organizing itself. All social structures serve only the will's perpetuation. Reform merely rearranges delusion's furniture. Every social institution rests on the premise that separate individuals can cooperatively pursue collective goods. But if individuals are temporary manifestations of one will, society is the one will organizing its operations through apparently multiple agents. Humanity does not progress toward enlightenment or justice. We cycle through the same patterns of desire and suffering with varying details. Democracy replaces monarchy. New forms of hierarchy emerge. Every attempt to improve society assumes that changing external conditions will reduce suffering. But suffering stems from identification with phenomenal self and will's insatiable striving. Neither changes through political reform. The enlightened serves humanity not by attempting reform, but by demonstrating that the cycle of striving can be broken through individual recognition rather than collective action. When tempted to engage in social reform, ask, does this address the fundamental problem identification with phenomenal self, or merely rearrange surface conditions? A student once asked, Master Schopenhauer, having achieved enlightenment, are you happy? I responded, I am not happy. Happiness is impossible, for it requires satisfaction, and satisfaction is impossible, for the will is insatiable. But I am not unhappy either, for unhappiness requires identification with the phenomenal self. I am resigned, which is better than happiness, because it does not depend on conditions that inevitably change. He seemed horrified. Most are. Yet it is the truth. Enlightenment does not lead to bliss, but to clear perception of existence as fundamentally without purpose or positive meaning. Hope assumes that future conditions will provide what present conditions do not: satisfaction, meaning, peace, but no future conditions can provide these, because the problem is not conditions, but the will that experiences all conditions as insufficient. Resignation differs from depression. Depression is pathological state requiring medical treatment. Resignation is clear perception that brings not joy but peace through elimination of false expectations. The enlightened recognizes a third position. Conditions are irrelevant because the separate self who experiences them is illusory. When hope arises, ask, who hopes? Trace back to the phenomenal self that hopes and recognize that self as temporary formation. Practice this. Hope arises. Hope is observed, but I am the awareness that observes, not the phenomenon observed. In my final years in Frankfurt, a young man asked, if enlightenment shows that the individual is illusory and effort is futile, why have you spent decades writing? I responded, I write for no one and for everyone. No one. Because the separate readers I address are illusory. Everyone, because we are fundamentally one. I write because writing is what occurs through this particular formation of will. Here is the ultimate paradox. I write about solitude to an audience, offer teaching while insisting teaching cannot be transmitted, address you while maintaining that the separate you I address is ultimately illusory. The body continues its operations not because these serve ultimate purpose, but simply because they occur. I write not because I believe I will enlighten others, but because writing emerges through this consciousness. The awakened individual maintains simultaneously two perspectives, the phenomenal, where separate beings exist, and the noumenal, where only the one will exists. Neither perspective is more true. Both are necessary. You who read this are both real and illusory. Real as phenomenal appearance, illusory as separate being, ultimately distinct from me. I write to you as though you exist because phenomenal communication requires this fiction. Having read to this point, you possess everything I can offer. If you have genuinely followed, certain changes have already occurred. You cannot participate unconsciously in collective delusions. You cannot seek community without recognizing the contradiction. Walk alone. There is no other way.